Hi, everybody. All right, I am going to wait for Elisheva to make her request so we can start. We're going to just dive right in because we have so much to cover. Hello, everyone. Here's Elisheva.
Hey.
Hi.
How are you?
I am good. How are you?
I am good. Thank you. Thank God.
Way too high. 1 second.
What's too high?
My camera.
Oh.
It's like it changes the size when another person joins. So.
Oh, okay.
So much for doing this with me.
I'm so excited. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Okay, Elisheva, you want to start with the intro?
Sure. Hi, I'm Elisheva. Thank you so much, Bracha, for inviting me. We're both excited and nervous to be talking about this really, really important topic. I guess I'll just tell you who I am for those of you who don't know. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist. I'm a psychotherapist in private practice. I have an accidental specialty treating sexual issues. It's not really what I set out to do, but it ended up becoming, like, at any given point, 60 to 75% of my caseload, just because it just emerged that there was so much of a need for people to be doing this in the Orthodox community. And over the years, in the course of meeting with hundreds of couples and individuals that tell me their stories, I've learned that there are some issues that they just are and they have to be dealt with, but there are some issues that are really preventable with better education. And so in the course of my career, I've tried to not only treat the problems, but figure out ways to educate and try to preempt some of them, because knowledge is power. And especially in this area, like psychosexual education can go such a long way in making something that could be either like wonderfully pleasurable, not be a source of like pain and trauma. It makes a big, big difference. So that's basically what we're going to be talking about tonight.
Absolutely. Okay, so thank you. Bracha, I think a lot of people do know me, but it's not because a lot of people know me.
A lot of people know you, Bracha.
Well, maybe, I don't know. But the point is, I'll introduce myself anyways for anyone who's new and for people who are watching it later, just so they know. I'm Bracha Bard-Wigdor. I am a bridal educator, which means I'm a college teacher and a sex and intimacy coach. I've been teaching for college for over 10 years. And about a year ago, I discussed this topic on my stories and got an unbelievable, overwhelming response. So since then, I've been having this buildup of doing this live, so I'm very excited, and we have a lot to cover. So everyone's just gonna have to bear with us. But really, what the content is going to be about. The lack of sex education and how it's actually impacting couples. Those are the women that I work with literally on a daily basis. And I think that people don't realize how prevalent of an issue it is, because when I talked about it, I even had other professionals be like, are you sure it's that much? It's that many people? And I'm like, well, the numbers,
I think it's more. It
is more. It's
I say for everyone that comes in to see,
more who didn't,
yeah.
So,
yeah.
Sorry. What were you going to say?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that I think for every person who goes, or every couple that goes to seek help for this, there are probably another 99 others who aren't necessarily seeking help, either because they don't necessarily realize that this is a treatable, solvable situation, or because of the stigma or shame or, other deterrents that people have for getting the help that they need in this area, which is so tragic, because compared to a lot of other mental health issues, this is actually very, very treatable.
Correct. Also, someone actually sent me a message saying, why are you doing this on Instagram? That most of the people who need to watch this are not even going to be here. I'm like, well, we have to start somewhere. I'm hoping the women who are watching this, some are here for themselves. Other ones are here to represent their sisters, their daughters, their cousins.
Friends,
yeah. And this is super important. So,
I will add something else to that, though. And I think you have a website too, for those people who are not on social media. And obviously we're preaching to the people who are on social media right now, but, probably it was someone who is that asked that question. Both of us have websites, and we have, content on our websites. And in fact, what kind of launched me into this sort of position as not just only doing this privately one-on-one with clients in my office was that I started blogging about it, writing articles about what I was learning, what I was seeing, seeing, what I was concerned about, what I felt like people needed to know. And the articles are available, you know, so even a lot of people who are not for religious reasons are not going to be on social media. Most people do have access to some form of internet, even if not in their own homes and on their own devices. So if they want to get free content, there's like, we'll talk more about materials, but I even have like books, like physical paper books that people, you know, so even if you don't want to have like, you know, Instagram or internet based information, there are a lot of ways to get educated. And like Bracha said, this is step one, but there are, you know, multimedial ways of learning educated, of getting educated.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. So why don't we talk about a little bit more about why we're doing this, and then we'll go ahead with the information that we want to cover.
Okay.
What do you have to say?
Okay. Well, I'm here because you invited me, and we had this really wonderful conversation where, you know, sometimes you intersect with other professionals that are in a similar space to you, and you find yourself sort of repeating similar issues and messages in surround sound. And I had written an article that to me didn't feel like that was that different than a lot of the other psychosexual education articles that I write. But this one made a much bigger splash in my own little, you know, audience of the world than my other ones had. It like hit like 10,000 views in the first week that it was, you know, published, and people were sharing it. And the article was titled, "I Used to Rape My Wife." And I had talked a lot about how many of the sexual issues that I see in my practice have to do with people not feeling autonomous, empowered, honest, clear about what good and healthy sex is supposed to feel like. And we're talking about between loving, healthy couples. We're not even talking about, you know, couples where there's abuse or dysfunction outside the bedroom, but even couples that would describe themselves as, you know, otherwise happy. There was just all of this like misinformation and miseducation that was coming from different places that so many couples were having, that applied this sense of like obligation, pressure, demand, a distortion of halacha, for both men and women, by the way. This is not just one gender problem. And so I had written about it, and we were getting a lot of feedback, and including Bracha, who said, "Oh my goodness, I've been saying the same thing. We need to do a talk about it." And so we've been messaging back and forth for a long time. Bracha just started a school program, so she's been super duper busy. It's one of those things that just is such a wonderful investment in educational energy, because, you know, and I believe this is true in a lot of areas, but particularly with regard to psychosexual education, a little information can go such a long way in making such a big difference. And I think, right, is that pretty much what we were looking to do?
Absolutely. So I actually, when I was worrying about this, I touched on the concept that, you know, college students are unfortunately not getting the information they need, because I was teaching were letting me know that their chasanim, their grooms, right? The brides were telling me that their grooms learned from their, you know, chasan rebbe, chasan teacher. It's basically the for those who don't know full Hebrew, but the teacher who's teaching them about the laws of marital sex, as well as the practicalities of sex to some degree that they're supposed to go into. And they were literally being told that even if you say no, he should just push his way into you anyways, because that's something that, like, halachically you have to do that. So the college students, like the ones who are my students who are learning with me, knew that that was not okay, because that's something that I discussed with them. But then they're coming to me with this information that their groom is literally learning this, and they're like, how do I navigate this? How do I tell him no? So when I was talking about it online, I literally wrote, like, this is seriously, like, you're teaching men to rape their brand new brides, like, on their wedding night, which is so, so horrible. And I just want people to know, like, besides for talking about it, obviously, like, try to make waves in, like, the education aspect of the community. Like, it's not like I haven't contacted these chassan teachers and college teachers. I have, and thank God, this is not a bash. There are some that are incredible and amazing, but unfortunately there are some that are not. And for those who are not, those brides and grooms that are learning about this, in, like, even if they know in their mind, they're thinking, really, like, that doesn't, like, some guys have told me that doesn't really make so much sense. It didn't make so much sense to me, or didn't feel comfortable, but my teacher told me I have to, so I guess I have to. And they did. And the couples, meaning not my students because they knew better because they learned with me, but the couples who are coming to me for coaching, they're coming to me with the aftermath, right? The trauma of how horribly that night went, and the consequences of that, and how it's impacting their sex life. So that's really what got this, for me, this conversation going, that I wanted to take this to another level, something that can be saved, that people can watch later, and just dive into some of the misconceptions that are going on now that me and you can hopefully tackle tonight.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's an important piece to say, because I think in the realm of this area of dysfunction, a lot of chassan and kala teachers get a really bad rap. And some of them deserve it, but many of them don't. And there's some really, really wonderful, premarital counselors and, educators out there doing an amazing job. And even some of the ones who are only doing like an okay job or an inadequate job, some of them are this is a sin of innocence, meaning they don't know any better. And actually I've had it like more times than I can count, that I was working with a young woman who was, relatively newly married within the first 5-10 years of marriage. And lo and behold, after I finished working with her, I would get a call from her college teacher saying, can you tell me a little bit about what you were doing? And it would turn out that sometimes the college teachers were suffering and didn't realize that they were suffering, when they were giving messages like, you just have to be there for your husband. It doesn't feel good for women. You just have to like show up for him. That's terrible messaging, and it's heartbreaking, but it's, it's tempting to like blame and point fingers. But actually we had talked about this a little on our sort of strategy call, is that one of the best pieces of advice I ever heard in a couples therapy training was try to get people to turn complaints into requests. And, because we can all complain for a long time, and there's plenty to complain about in a lot of ways. Our community does an amazing, amazing job in a lot of different areas, chesed and tzedakah and, medical help. Like, we do incredible work in a wide, generous way. One area where we need tremendous improvement is in the area of sex education. And, particularly for chassan and kala teachers, even the ones that are doing an outstanding job, this is like a very difficult time. We expect a lot of them. It's a few months before the wedding. These young people have a ton on their minds. They're building a relationship. They're planning a big party. They're setting up their apartment. They're getting used to, all these new realities. This is not the best time for them to be playing catch up on 18 to 22 years of non-existent sex ed. So this is larger than just a chassan and kala teacher problem. This is for parents. This is for schools. This is for educators, and for sorry.
For you.
Sorry.
I'm going to plug your course for you.
Thank you.
We made a course for parents it's called Sacred Not Secret, to educate parents on how to talk to their kids about sex. And I didn't publish it yet, but I am going to do a sex education series for already married women. Mm-hmm. And after that, I might be able to tackle some for the single sphere. But the point is that there are some of us that are doing so much and as much as we can about it. And even still, here's what's heartbreaking for me personally. It still feels like the tip of the iceberg. That's what's really hard. And so that's why it's like kind of tonight's overwhelming. We're like, oh my God, Alicia, before we were talking, like, there's so much pressure. We have so much to cover. But you know what? We're going to do our best on an individual level. Me and you see this all the time. This is the women and the couples that we work with. And hopefully, like, now we could just get this a little bit more out into the masses. So let's talk about some of the common misconceptions, right, that we were going to do. If you want to start with that.
Sure. So
if I look back just to drop so people could see you more. Yeah, perfect.
Is that better?
I didn't see you so well. Yeah, it's perfect.
Oh, thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay. So some of the common misconceptions that people walk into their marriages with, I think it's even before they walk into chassan and kala classes. I think it depends how far back you want to go. But I think if we're starting with just at the adult stage, at the ready to get married stage. So depending on which, we say the Orthodox community, but we're not one community. We're not a monolith. There are multiple communities, and there is a lot of, relative diversity in terms of how we do tznius messaging and how we do marriage messaging and sex messaging and even dating messaging. And I know that you have a very wide audience. So I want to try to honor and respect the fact that there are all these differences. But I think what we're dealing with.
Quick points here for a second.
Sorry?
I'm going to make a quick point here for a second. When I was doing the stories on this and like was posting screenshots, I literally heard from like every single affiliation, including some non-Jewish people, which it was so nice. Like, it was good to hear from them. There's so much similarity, unfortunately, in the miseducation in religious communities. But I've heard from women who are like modern Orthodox, traditional, super Hasidish, like, this isn't like a slam or a pinpoint on one particular community. There is, in America alone, I wrote like a 25-page paper on this last semester, but on sex education in America in general, in the Orthodox community, as you're addressing, is like, it's even more of an issue because we have the element of like modesty, tznius. There's some taboo aspect in it that's actually negative more than positive, that makes it like almost impossible, feels impossible for people to know how to talk about it. So I just wanted to say that, and for us to keep in mind, like whenever we're using the Hebrew words, to kind of translate to English for those who are watching who don't identify with all the Judaic terminology. So go ahead.
Yeah. In fact, I was actually listening to a lecture by somebody who is a sex therapist and specializes with the Mormon community. And she was talking about how a lot of women are not in touch with their bodies because of the emphasis on modesty in their education. And it made me smile because it's like, okay, so it's not, you know, it's everywhere. And the truth is, I think, and I read an article about sex ed in public schools, in the public school system, which is highly secular. And the critique of this article was that there was too much of an emphasis on abstinence and danger and STDs and, sexual negativity. Sorry?
All the scary things.
Right.
It's about like pleasure, consent, communication about it. Like it's all like
body positivity. Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, and if you get pregnant or you could get an abortion, there's not really, I did a lot of research on that also. There's not a whole lot of actual sex education that they're getting, which I think is so important for some of the Jewish couples who are listening to hear that, because I've actually had clients tell me, like, I am not letting my kids go through this. Like, I just want to send them to public school. Like, I don't blame them. They have so much angst and anger to the system that failed them so miserably. They're like, I was a good kid. Like, I went to school, went to yeshiva, did everything right, didn't talk to the opposite gender. You didn't have boyfriends and girlfriends, like, got married, did everything, the kosher way. And here we are, like, our sex life is awful, or we're suffering and struggling, and didn't even know about the concept of consent. And that was really, like, it's devastating. And sometimes, like, obviously I first hear them out and offer empathy, but I also tell them, like, I just want you to know, like, it's not better out there. Like, when you said you smile, it's not a smile, it's we're happy. We're smiling that we resonate, but this is something that's, like, really an issue in so many communities. We don't want people to think that this is like a Jewish problem only, we're just addressing it mostly for the Orthodox Jews because that's who we are, and that's what most of my following and your following is. And that's part of the community that we're in. So yeah,
for sure. So I think, one of the things I talk about in that Sacred Not Secret course that you mentioned is what I call Goldilocks sexuality. There's like too much this or too much that. We're living in a time of great polarization and extremism. And I think in sexuality, there is sort of a polarization too. So we have sometimes, like, I think a classical issue that I see with a lot of couples is the hypersexual man and the hyposexual woman. A guy who's, most guys nowadays have been exposed to porn. They're not all addicted to porn, but they've been exposed to porn. So they've, for some of them, a lot of their entire sex ed has come from pornography. And for a lot of the women, and I'm generalizing, by the way, I know that I'm doing gender stereotyping. And the reason I'm doing it right now is because those are the statistics. That doesn't mean every man had this and everyone. Right.
In years, like in the last 2-3 years, I've been watching, like, I read articles about it. They're spike in females watching porn, but it's still more male than female. So that's true. Yeah.
And even the way females interpret porn messaging is different than the way men interpret it. Like, it hits a different nerve. So there's sort of, an extremism with that. And so there are these expectations. So one misconception when people go get married, and we're talking about couples who are not sexually active before marriage. There are some couples that are, and even the ones that are, but let's say they're only like PG or PG-13 level sexually active. It's a very different experience when you're having different types of real intercourse. But let's say we're working with sort of the norm, the Orthodox norm of becoming sexually active when you get married. So one misconception is it's just natural. You're just going to know what to do. You like jump into bed and you rip each other's clothes off and it feels amazing right from the get-go. Okay. So what I always tell people is don't discount that as a possibility, but it's not a realistic expectation, So it's sex is a skill like anything else. It takes time to learn, and a relationship is a skill. It takes time, takes communication. And then there's the opposite extreme, right? That Goldilocks flip-flop. So it's like it's going to be amazing right off the bat. And if it's not, then it means that I married the wrong person, or there's something wrong with me or him, or that, we're just not, there's this terrible shame and distress. or the opposite of like, it's going to be horrible, it's going to be excruciating, it's, you know, like the catastrophizing of it. And so both of those extremes are incredibly unhelpful. And so when actually there was something else that I wanted to mention here and offer is that on one of my articles, one of my blog posts, I talk about a document that you remember you were talking a minute ago, Bracha, about educating chassan and kala teachers who want to do better, but they don't know better. So I was invited to a community, a specific Hasidic community in Brooklyn at one point a number of years ago, to come and teach them how to do a better job teaching about sex. And they were incredibly receptive, very intelligent, very respectful women. And they said, like, can we get more? And so I went home and I wrote up a document. It's like an 8 or 9 page single space document for kala teachers. And I really wanted to make it available to people, but I didn't want to publish it on the internet because it was just one of those things that it was sensitive. So on the blog post, I invite anybody who would like a copy, and I'm inviting our listeners too. If anybody wants a copy, email me for a copy, and I just ask you to keep it discreet. It shouldn't be spread around. If you want it, just email, I'll send it to you. It's free, just to have it for what I would love for kala teachers to be teaching their students. But anyway, so, you know, so there's that in that.
But I say, like, for me also, for all of my college students that I taught, because I mentioned this earlier, for college students that I taught, it's because they learned their chassanim, right? Their grooms were learning with their own chassan rebbe, and I was so concerned with these guys. Like, it's like, it doesn't help. I mean, it helps, obviously, but if she learned one thing, right? She learned from me, you can take your time and you should communicate about it and go slow and easy and gentle. And he learns, push your way through, and no, even if she says no, just keep going. It's a mitzvah. You have to do it tonight. It's like, how are they resolving that? Like, on their wedding night, sometimes they never even spoke about sex. Also, now they're supposed to know how to communicate about, like, you learned this and I learned that, and what do we do about that, right? So I actually started offering my college students to have the chassan shmooze after their classes with my husband, just to be able to clarify, like, wedding night information. So at least they go in on the same page, like, that night, of, like, knowing, like, no, whatever your chassan teacher told you, if you learned it that way, that, you know, you have to, you know, you for sure have to have sex tonight. He's clarifying for them that you don't. And it's so, so important that they come in, like, on the same page about that. So I just wanted to mention, like, you reminded me by saying that, to mention that. And, like, again, it's just about them doing it together, and knowing the same piece of information is so, so important. So
Totally.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So that would, you know, that's a huge one, you know, the extreme. Oh, so the reason that I mentioned that document, which I saw a few people ask, how can they get it? We'll post that information somehow. I don't want to waste time on that. Yeah. So one of the things that I really wish that every young man and woman who's getting, or older man, you know, whenever you're getting married, you know, would hear, is that there are basically 3 paths that a couple could have towards a mutually pleasurable, beautiful, intimate sexual relationship. And these are the 3 paths. Number 1, they get married, they come together, they start touching each other. It feels wonderful. They explore each other's bodies, they find pleasure. And it's, you know, where has this been my whole life? I'm so grateful. And so that would be very lucky. And by the way, but it's not like nobody has that. It's not I don't think that's the majority.
It's not the majority.
Not the majority by any stretch. But the reason sorry?
I'm saying you're the minority that it worked out that way. That's why we call it lucky. You're lucky. Good
it's
for
fortunate. You. And there are ways you can set your child up to be more likely to be in that camp, right? And that is by starting the education process not 10 minutes before their wedding, right? By starting, because sexuality and sexual development are going on from birth, or even in utero, according to some research. You know, so positive body messaging and positive sexual experience messaging is really important. That's beyond the scope of tonight's life, but that's just like something to keep in mind. But that first way of becoming sexually active is something. The reason I want it in there as an option is because when people get married with the expectation that it's going to be horrible at the beginning, it could become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And if he and she if they're nice people and they're excited about each other and they're sexually in touch with themselves and they're attracted, it could happen. Very often I'm doing an interview with a couple and I say, tell me about your wedding night. And I'm expecting them to be like, oh my gosh, our wedding night, it was a trauma, because very often that's the answer. But sometimes they say, oh, the wedding night was lovely. It was wonderful. It's, you know, things kind of derailed after that. And very often it was lovely and wonderful because they both had this like kind of like low expectation, high hope. Let's go gently. Let's communicate. Let's figure this out together. You know, and it's not a dig on anyone or their spouse if it didn't work out that way, but it can be. Don't discredit that possibility, but don't expect it. Option number 2 is it's awkward, right? Because you're dealing with two people who presumably haven't done this before with each other or even necessarily with anyone else. And so they're doing something for the first time, right? Picture getting on an ice skating rink the first time. It's not so pretty, right? Right? When we're doing something for, sorry.
Like, you don't look like a professional skater.
Bracha does, but
I actually don't like ice.
Neither do I. So anytime you're doing something for the first time, there's a learning curve usually. Every so often you find someone who's just like, they figure this out and they're very intuitive, but the vast majority of time, it takes patience, it takes sensitivity, communication, practice. It feels clumsy, it feels awkward, it feels messy, right? But when you're dealing with two people who are kind, who are empathetic, who are respectful, who are patient, who know going in that this is a learning curve, you just kind of like take your time with it. And it might take days or weeks or months, but as long as nobody is feeling hurt psychologically or physically by it, you keep kind of getting better, and you can, have conversations about it and see, oh, that feels good. Oh yeah, we're doing it right. Okay, now this feels bad, right? And the third way is that it's really, really difficult, right? Even maybe painful, even maybe psychologically distressing. And that is not at all uncommon. There is nothing wrong with you or your partner if that's your experience. But guess what? If that's your case, then you go and you call your chassan teacher, your kala teacher, your therapist, your doctor, your parent, your mom, if you have that kind of relationship with her. I know some people like, keep your parents out of it. No, if you have a good relationship with your parents and they could be a resource, that's fine. But and you get the help that you need. In all three cases, you can have a happy ending, right? Case number one, it starts out happy and it just keeps getting more wonderful. In case number two, it takes a little time and then you find your mojo and it feels good. And in case number three, it's not going well naturally. So you support each other and you say, okay, this is rough. Let's get some help. Let's get some guidance, right? But as long as people know that all three of those are totally normal, possible outcomes, and that there's no stigma, there's nothing to be ashamed of, there's no evil person. And I know that there are marriages that have broken up probably unnecessarily because they were in camp number 2 or number 3, and they didn't realize that this is something that's kind of a normal, growing pain of a relationship, and they could have gotten help and it was mishandled, And again, not blaming these people, but it's such a shame that, something that is treatable and manageable and also to some extent preventable could become such a source of trauma.
Preventable part is my favorite part.
Of course.
The education sphere, that's, I think, what we both really care about.
For sure.
Women or couples who are already dealing with it after the fact, but, prior to that, that's you're passionate about teaching parents about now so that they can do better for their children. It could go differently. Being passionate about teaching brides and couples like at a young age, that's so important because people really don't realize like the how far it can go. Like I've had women come to me who are like told me like we actually didn't consummate our marriage for 2 whole years, and they had no one to talk to about it because their teacher or a chassan teacher didn't make it like that would be the case. Their parents never spoke to them about sex, so they're not gonna, like what you said, your parents could be a resource. Yeah, if your parents spoke to you about it. If they didn't, they're not, and like their doctor was like, what do you mean? Just like, just do it and get over it. Sometimes it's sad that like people actually tried to reach out for some of the help and didn't even get the answers that they needed. And that's part of our preventative education here in terms of sharing the proper information so that they know even like what is normal, what to expect, how could it go better for my friend, sister, or if someone single is watching and someone who's married finds some peace if that was their experience.
Yeah, I want to add something else is that over the years I found people coming in earlier and earlier in their relationship, which is great. But I've also seen people coming in after 10, 20, even more than 20 years of marriage saying, I'm so embarrassed that like, here I am. And I like, I've had children, I've married off children, whatever. And I still haven't figured out this part of my life. What I would say if there's anybody on who's in that situation, like, do not feel ashamed of yourself. Like we all are just doing the best we can with the knowledge that we have. There's a quote that I love by, I think it's Maya Angelou, says like, do the best you can until you know better, then do better. So, if a person has been suffering and struggling for a long time, whether it's been, just a few weeks or a few years or many years, right? This is a very learnable skill. And of course, the longer it's been, the more, sort of undoing and deprogramming you have to do from like the negative sexual associations. But it's never too late to start trying to heal this part of your relationship. And it's never too early to start building, good, healthy, kind of, sexual orientation for yourself.
Right. Actually, someone reached out to me last week who's married for over 30 years. So
there you go.
And good for her.
Good for her. Good for her.
What else?
Well, I know that we wanted to talk about, there was something that we had talked about together that I think was an important, sort of thrust of this, which is the topic of not just consent in the typical yes or no like context, but the idea of obligationality, which I don't think is a word, but you know what I mean by that, right? I made up the word. It's like frindle, right? Meaning a lot of the questions that came in had to do with like, do I have to do this or do we have to do that? Do you have to have intercourse on the wedding night? Do you have to have sex on mikveh night? Do you have to, so I always tell people like, I really don't like the phrase have to with regard to sex. There are not a huge number of religious sexual prohibitions that we have, but one of them is forced sex. Somebody wrote obligationality. Yes. Okay. Right. One of them is forced sex. That is like one of the things that is considered like religiously, halachically prohibited. And some people don't realize this. And I'll take that a step further and say, when you talk about consent, people sometimes think like, so you said yes or so you said no, but it's really not that simple, because if you think about, let's say, free will, right? Someone holds a gun to my head and says, do the following thing. So if I consent in that moment, I'm saying yes, right? But is it consent? I mean, there's a gun to my head, right? Sorry, I have no choice, right? Right now, so a gun to the head is.
You do, but then you'll be dead. So you don't have a choice.
Exactly, death or do what I say. So I have a choice, but it's not a great choice, right? So let's take it up a notch. Let's say it's not a gun to my head, but it's like, I'm going to break your arm. Okay, so do break your arm. Okay, that's not as bad, right? But I don't want to get my arm broken, so I don't really have much of a choice. Now, let's say someone said, if you don't do what I say, you're breaking the law, right? And that's where we're getting into this grayer area. So when you take young people who have little to no education in this area and have been trained to do what they're told by authority figures, particularly religious authority figures, right? And they're told, you must have sex under these circumstances on this night, at this time, right? So they're going to say yes because they feel that yes is the only answer they're supposed to give. Oh, and another really important one, which you and I had discussed, is when women are told, and I actually wrote a whole article on this, called when women are told you're not supposed to say no to your husband. Right? Which, to my knowledge, there's no real source for that. And by the way, another big hang up that I have is when you're being educated about religious sexual law, if something sounds off to you, always say, oh, can I get a source for that, please? There's nothing disrespectful about asking for sources. On the contrary, you're a good student. If your teacher is someone who's not comfortable with you asking for sources, find yourself a new teacher. And I don't mean that in an extreme way. If your teacher says, I don't know of a source offhand, but I can look for one for you, that's fine. Then they're an honest teacher. But so when a person, man or woman, by the way, feels like they have no right to say no under any circumstance, and I'm not just talking about intercourse, we're talking about any kinds of touch, right? So in that case, so then how meaningful is the yes, right? Like if my no is not an option, then my yes is like a gun to the head yes. And the reason that this is so important, number one, is because, unwanted sexual touch registers as a trauma. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody who has had unwanted sexual touch has PTSD and is traumatized and is going to suffer long-term repercussions from it. But it means that it is it's a possibility, it's a danger. And pressure is not something that usually leads to pleasure. Right? So if someone feels pressure to perform, if someone feels a pressure to be available, if someone's feeling obligated, mandated, right, that is going to take a lot of the desire and the fun.
That's literally the number one killjoy.
Number one killjoy, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important topic, the topic of, not just consent in terms of like, well, I guess so, right? It's consent of, I don't think I have, it would be wrong for me to say no. Another misconception that I think a lot of young religious women have, I think they call this the gatekeeper syndrome, but somebody can correct me if I'm misremembering the name of the syndrome, is when a woman feels obligated to perform sexually for her husband because otherwise he's going to cheat or turn to porn or engage in other types of sexually sinful behavior, and it's going to be my fault if he does that. And so I am the Sorry?
Yeah. No, go ahead and I'll jump in after.
Yeah. So then I am the gatekeeper of his sexual behavior. And this gives such an unhealthy message to both men and women. It gives men the message of you're not mature enough and not strong enough to control your sexual urges. And women, the message that your husband is not mature enough or, to control his sexual urges. And
have to service him at all times, no matter what, or anything else he does is your fault.
Right. The sexual toilet issue, like you're not his sexual toilet. Somebody just wrote, what about men with the obligation of mitzvahs ona? Are they allowed to say no? So my understanding of the mitzvah of ona is that a man overall is responsible to make sure that his wife is in a sexually satisfying relationship, but it's also not okay for a woman to pressure or force or demand sex from her husband. But if in either...
Add in louder terms, please, for 1 second. Okay, as I'm saying this, it is never, ever, ever okay for it to be force. That's like number one, ever, including the wedding night, mikvah night, any other time. Number two, never allowed to be like, not even forced is more, in what sounds like in the more non-consensual way, but even in the more nuanced way, it's never ever okay to be like, but you have to, because I'm asking you or telling you, like, I need you now, so therefore we're going to. That's still not okay either. The whole mitzvah of ona, the mitzvah of pleasure that a man has to his wife, first of all, he's supposed to try to get himself in the mood. If he's not, if she sees she's in the mood, so he could be there for her, and vice versa. Woman has that, like, even though it's more of the man's obligation according to the Torah, because that is what it says, which, by the way, is not what most people teach. They actually teach the opposite. They make it like the woman has to service the man. But the truth is that the mitzvah of ono, the mitzvah of pleasure, is that the man is responsible to pleasure his wife. And it's a woman's mitzvah, right? Commandment, positive commandment back, to be there for him and make him happy too. With that being said, if she's not in the mood, then she's allowed to say no. And if he's not in the mood, he's allowed to say no. When one or both of you are not feeling in the mood, let's say it's, by the way, mikvah night, and this happens a lot to people also, like, mikvah night's my hardest night to have sex. Actually, a couple people asked this in the questions box. It's my hardest night to have sex. I feel so pressured, like we have to. Do we have to? No, like what you're saying, you don't have to anything. Should couples who have a healthy relationship try to, like, get themselves in the mood so that they can and be interested? Sure, go ahead. Like have a date night, talk about it, schmooze, play, like do foreplay, like do other things and see if it leads to that. And if it doesn't, then it's fine, but like the concept of like, but you have to because it says, is like, that's exactly how it becomes pressured and not pleasured at all. And then people wonder, like, why is this not enjoyable for me? Because you didn't really want to be here. You want to do 10 other things other than be here right now. You would rather wash the dishes or watch your show or whatever else you wanted to do tonight, or do your laundry or call your best friend than be here. That is not the circumstance to be having sex in, So that's a very big problem that I see as both a college teacher and a coach, in terms of like the conflict that people have. But I don't understand, then how do you explain the halachic aspect of it? So that it's a real big problem.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think that this halachic piece of it of, you're not allowed to have sex with someone who doesn't want to be there, is something that really needs a lot more press time.
Well, but that's part of the whole, like, that's part of the, losing my words here. Like, that's the force that's not as intensely forced, but it's, in a way, it's forced. Like you said, well, I have the gun to my head. I don't have to do this, but I guess I kind of do. When a woman feels, and by the way, when I say woman now, it's because we do see this being, correct me, I mean, Elishav, you tell me, do you see this being more female than male? I see this being a lot more of a female issue than male, meaning that the women are a lot less interested than the men in this sense. And they have, therefore, the harder time to say no, because they have the guilt that they have on their heads because they learned in their schooling or their miss sex education. The little sex education they got was like, you need to be there for him, otherwise he's going to watch porn, or he's going to cheat on you, or he's going to go to strip clubs and and like, have an affair. And it's just like, oh my God, that is
not the place.
No, that is sex.
Yeah, I almost, there's a and this goes back to the pre-engagement messaging. I feel like in a lot of our communities, the extremism with regards to sexual avoidance has become like a sexual repression to the point of sexual obsession. You know, it's like an obsession with repression. And so then there's this like fear of some sort of sexual sin that kind of overtakes a couple. And instead of it being like a mode of pleasuring each other and connection and physical intimacy and emotional intimacy, it just becomes this sense of like, well, do we have to? Are we supposed to? I don't want him to sin. I don't want to, and one of the things that I love to teach my couples, especially the couples that really do have a beautiful friendship and emotional relationship and a healthy way of relating to one another outside the bedroom, is that most healthy people in a good, loving, not selfish relationship would much rather have a loving, respectful no over a grudging, dishonest yes. So, you know, if you're, and by the way, you know, back to the question of, men versus women, you know, sometimes I get criticized, like people will say like, how come you always present from the female perspective as being lower libido and the male perspective being higher libido? Like, that's not a fair stereotype. Well, you know, in the experience that I have in the couples that I've worked with, that's the majority. Are there zero couples that are reversed? No, it's not. There are definitely couples like that. And I really feel for those couples because very often they feel a tremendous amount of shame because they know that their situation defies the stereotype. But you know what? There's all kinds of people, all kinds of marital issues, all kinds of stuff in the world. And whatever you're dealing with, you're dealing with. There's no shame. We're all just people trying to do the best job we can in a confusing world, you know? And
like in terms of the shame, the problem with that also is like sometimes the man will feel like, well, I don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And wife will be like, well, but you need to, or you have to, or
same problem. Right.
The same issue in reverse. And it's not okay in that situation either for her to be like, well, you need a pleasure mate. That's what the Torah says. Yeah. If you want to, you know, like if he doesn't want to right now, again, if I would say if it's like, you know, a night here and there, like so normal, obviously for a couple, if it's like repeated, if there's a repeat issue of one partner always wanting and the other one always not, then yes, you need to get some help, and that's okay. You know, like people ask me all the time, like, is this normal? I'm like, yes, it's normal as in it's common, but it's not normal as in leave it that way.
Right.
No. You can change it, and you should change it because you are married. You know, at least in our culture, in our belief, in our Torah, we believe in having, you know, you have right now, well, you know, one spouse, and that means one place to have your sexual energy and desires expressed. So if your partner is always saying no, like constantly, that's obviously an issue and something you guys need to both go address together.
Yeah, totally. You know, and it's not only is it, you know, common and normal for there not to be exactly on the same page as far as libido, but I often will present it to couples like this. You know, there are we're all different humans, right? We have different personalities. We grew up in different families and communities and have different hangups. And the same way that no two people feel the exact same way about spending money, about cleanliness, about religious, observance, right? There are so many areas where we're going to have little differences here and there, right? It's unrealistic to expect to agree with your spouse about everything, right? You're always going to have areas of disagreement. And the difference between a healthy relationship and not is not whether, we agree on everything. We're like the same person. Like sometimes you hear engaged couples who are like very like in love with each other talk that way, but it's not really true. Realistically, maybe they don't know each other well enough yet. But at some point you're going to bump up against like, I like to run early. He likes to run late. I like to save. He likes to spend. Things come up. And the way that good, loving couples, healthy couples communicate and deal with this is to just figure out what are my needs, what are your needs, how can we brainstorm to put our like heads together and figure out how to meet our each other's needs in a way that we both feel understood, you know? And so like Bracha said, I'm so happy you said that because I was thinking it before you said it. It's like, you know, if it's a chronic issue, you know, sometimes when I'm working with my couples and I see that one of them is feeling like overly pressured for sex, I'll say, you know, we got to take it down a notch or, you know, kind of lower the frequency a little bit. And they'll be like, well, but then I'm not going to get my needs met. It's like, you're not getting your needs met anyway. If you're having sex with an unwilling partner, let's tone it down a notch so we can see if we can sort of bridge the desire gap this way.
Yeah. I'm trying to think what else you wanted to cover. Oh, I wanted to mention the trauma aspects. Can we dive into a little bit more, first of all, with the trauma after they've had this experience? And also I want to mention how painful this is and common also for survivors of sexual abuse. Unfortunately, what happens is if someone has a sexual abuse history and then they get married and then they learn, well, you have to do it this way. again, this is what they're, unfortunately people are learning. It just takes so much of that rights and autonomy away from whoever was abused in a moment that could have been so much more healing, if anything, or neutral, or even painful. Like, it could still be traumatic by having flashbacks and so on. And I'm sure, obviously that person has to work it out in their trauma therapy. And obviously someone who has a history of sexual abuse should go to trauma therapy before they get married, because they shouldn't think like, well, no, that was the trauma. And then when I'm having my husband, my husband who looks so cute and I love him so much, right? And think like, oh, it's not going to bother me. It will. It can, and it will surface. So I just want to highlight.
It might.
Yeah,
it might. It's not a given. Like, meaning there are a large number of survivors of sexual abuse. It's not a given. A lot of people have this misconception that if someone ever touched me against my will, that means I'm like tainted for loving, mutual, safe, enjoyable sex. You're not tainted, because even if you need therapy to get through it, there are hundreds of thousands of people who survived, molestation and sexual abuse who learned to enjoy safe, loving touch. And B, even if you didn't get help, which like Bracha said, you should, but even if you didn't get help, there's a chance, again, not everyone who experiences trauma experiences PTSD, but
right.
It's a possibility. So we have to be responsible. Sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
No, for sure. And it's a strong possibility. Like, it's more common than not. And again, the people who are not, they're, in that sense, they're considered lucky, but a lot of people are impacted by it, but they shouldn't think that that's the way it's going to be forever. But the part that I think is so important here, that is in terms of the education piece, is for them to know, like, when you're getting married, or if you are already married, not to think, well, I have to. There's so much conflict that happens in that person's mind, even more so than the average person already. And I think that that's really, obviously devastating and should be addressed. So yeah, I just want that out. And like, again, people, whoever needs to get help should definitely get help. Don't need to suffer alone. So back to consent. Yeah. We're going to bring back to consent.
Sure.
The concept of, to answer this, really what, many people ask this question of like, do I have to? Is there really a concept of being able to say no? I actually posted that slide on my stories right before we started the live. Like, someone said, like, but is there really, like, is there actually a truth to like saying, no, I'm really not up for it now? So I feel like, we answered like, yes, there is truth to that, and you can say no. But what else do you have to say about that, Elisheva?
So in terms of the saying no, I would say like this, because, all things being equal, consent means you want this, but sometimes when I'm talking to a couple where, the lower libido party, it's not complex for them. They're not a trauma survivor. They're not in distress from sex, but this happens a lot with women who are particularly busy. Let's say they have young children and they're being woken up during the night, or they're working a lot of hours while trying to also be a mom. Like, there's a nice chunk of the state, like the life cycle of, a mother that you're just never really like feeling super relaxed. And sometimes when women will read my articles and they'll be like, I don't know, sometimes I just feel like I want to be there for my husband, even if I'm not feeling turned on. And what I always want to make a point of saying is like, don't fight one extreme with the other. So if you know that you're at a stage of your life where you're not feeling a tremendous amount of anticipatory desire, right? Like, you come home from work, or your kids come home from school, whatever, your day is winding down, and you're not thinking like, oh, I want to jump into bed with my husband and rip each other's clothes off. You're thinking like, I can't wait till these little people close their eyes and I can close my eyes, right? And then your husband sort of like hints like, oh, would you be in the mood to be together tonight, or something like that, right? Don't feel like, oh no, I'm going to be one of those like dysfunctional women if I try to make time for him, even though I wasn't thinking about it. If you're in a relationship where you can sort of get it going, or you can play it by ear, there's absolutely nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I'm really tired. I wasn't really thinking about it, but like, let's try for it. Let's go. Let's start cuddling. Let's start kissing and see where it leads us. And, and see if it's, if it feels good. And the thing about consent is, it's not just about like the beginning of the activity. So, right. Like, so if, let's say, you think you're in the mood, right? And you start kissing and making out, and it feels really nice. But then at a certain point you feel, physically uncomfortable or emotionally uncomfortable, or something just happens and you just get triggered and you're just like, I don't think I can do this. You can sort of withdraw your consent at that point. You can sort of say like, I'm so sorry, but I'm just, I'm not feeling great right now. Can we just hold each other for a little bit? And if you're in a loving relationship and you say it in a loving way, you didn't do anything terrible, and if that's going to make your husband a little disappointed or uncomfortable, that's okay. He's allowed to have his feelings too, as long as he's not going to guilt you with them. And
so it's like you don't, a woman, like, again, we're saying this in the female tone, right? but obviously this could happen in reverse. Woman's like in it and not feeling it at any point. She can't say, someone said, how do I say no without killing the mood? Well, if it kills the mood, first of all, you're not responsible for that more than you're responsible for your body, like listening to what your body's telling you. If your body's telling you, I cannot, or I do not want to do this right now, then that's what you should listen to more. Again, if this is something that's recurrent and happens very often, I highly encourage this person to like get some professional guidance and help on avoiding that situation from constantly happening. But when it happens every so often, that it's so normal to listen to that instead of be like, okay, you know what? No, just go fast. Let's just finish up. And like her head is just someplace else, totally not interested. And afterwards feeling violated because she didn't listen to herself. She did not listen to her body. She did not like or feel good about the experience. And what often happens after a woman is in this situation is that the next time he's interested, your body is feeling even more like, no, like, I don't want to do that. Because your body remembers, like our bodies remember what we do. And so when a woman for weeks or months or years is going through this place where I don't really want to have sex, I'm having sex for him because I was told I have to, or that's my college teacher said I have to, or he went to his rabbi and his rabbi said, well, yeah, that's what you're good for, right? And that kind of thing. It's just like not feeling it and constantly pushing yourself into that position. It's going to backfire, and it doesn't really end, it doesn't go so well. And there is a much better way to go about it than that. So I actually wanted to share a quick story of, it's actually, it'll be a compilation of lots of clients of what I see, but, where women will be like, I learned that you have to have sex with your husband. You have to, right? Like they're asking me for validation of that in the session. And I'm just listening first and looking like, right, you have to. And then, so I go to mikvah and I'm like crying. And like I come home and as soon as I walk through the door, I like wipe my tears and plaster the smile on my face and says, I'm here for you, and like the amount of women, oh my gosh, the amount of women that do this and like go to bed and they're with their husband and they're just like, okay, I guess I have to have sex. This is the way it is. It's mikvah night. We're supposed to do it. It's a mitzvah. Somehow, like this is not a mitzvah, by the way, to have sex when you don't want to. That's not when it's a mitzvah. And then they're being with their husband and they're feeling nothing, or they're feeling triggered or not satisfied, or part of them is feeling pressured, but another part of them is like, I really don't want to do this right now. I'm so tired, or I'm so not in the mood, or so stressed out by so many other things going on. And then they're doing this like again and again and again. All of a sudden, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years later, like they wake up or they stumble on information like this and they're like, oh my gosh, like I don't need to do it like that. So we're here to say, first of all, no, so sorry you thought that. It's number one. Number two, for anyone who's listening to this and feeling that right now, like that heart-crushing devastation, I just want to say I'm so sorry. That you've been going through this whole time where you're like pressuring yourself or feeling pressured by your spouse or the things that you learned or the stuff that your teachers told you that this is the way you have to do it. I really want those people to know, no, you don't. Like you really don't. There is a better way. This is not the way. This is not holy sex, by the way. Like this is not when God's not like being like, sure, I'm going to rest in this house right now. Like you really hate this and you have my blessing. No, sex is supposed to be enjoyable and pleasurable and enhance your relationship. If sex is a source of trauma and pain and disconnect as opposed to connecting and bonding, and it's just feeling so miserable and you're fighting after, or you're using it as a reason to like make up from a fight, which again, like not the way. First make up and then have makeup sex. Don't use sex as a way of like, this is the way we're going to make up with each other. There's so much that's emotionally not okay with that people are really not aware of, and that really, really hurts, and it compiles, right? And this is what we're seeing from the women that we work with or women who reach out to us in whatever way that they do. And why, Elisheva, that article struck a chord for so many that, got 10,000 views, and why, like my slide that I said, this is rape, like call it what it is. Like we're not saying to these husbands right now, God forbid, I want to clarify something, that they're a rapist, right? And that their wives are not raped if they don't feel or want to identify with that. But to say that it's not consensual is accurate when you keep forcing yourself or pushing yourself or think that you have to be in that position. That is not okay, you know? So I wanted to hear what you have to say about that as far as, you know, the trauma aspect and how people can heal from that and shift from that and move away from, even though this is their experience, what they can do different and better.
Yeah, so there's like a few different elements of the trauma. There's the premarital trauma, like when someone has been abused in some way as a child or teenager or a young adult before marriage, and that may get triggered in, you know, even loving, safe, consensual marital sexual activity. And then there's the wedding night trauma, which is something that we see a lot of, to the point where a lot of the couples that come in are coming with, like, you know, they get referred by their mentor, their mashpia, you know, their rabbi or a college teacher, like, we think she was probably abused, but she just didn't tell anyone. It's like, no, she was abused by your education. Like, she was abused by the fact that she got to her wedding night like a lamb to the slaughter, feeling like she had no choice. And so I actually wrote an article titled Sexual Abuse When There's No Abuser, because like you said, even though a man may have been instructed to rape his wife, because that's what it means when you tell a man just keep going, and even if she's saying no, right? So he may be a really sweet man outside of the bedroom until that moment, but he was educated to rape his wife. And so that is a trauma in that moment. And so a lot, and they keep going, meaning if like they think this is a normal way to consummate a marriage, then this is, you know, she's going to get back into that bed. Like you said, the body remembers, it's an association or a disassociation. They have the traumatic reaction. And then a tremendous amount of the work that they have to do as a couple, generally in therapy, is to sort of de-traumatize the sexual experience for them. I want to jump into something that somebody asked on in the comments that I think is really important. Somebody wrote, what about spilling seed? The problem with spilling seed. And what I often explain to people when I say, you know, when I tell these couples or their, you know, their mentors, you know, that we need to take a break from sex in order to heal this couple. They're, okay, well, what about spilling seed? I'm like, how was he dealing with not spilling seed from when he turned 12 until he turned 20 something and got married, right? However he figured out how to not spill seed or deal with the seed spillage for those 8 years or so, and however you expect him to deal with it for the 6 to 8 weeks after his wife has a baby, however he's expected to deal with it if he gets divorced, where this marriage might be headed to, right? However we expect men to not spill seed when they don't have a woman to be there for them, that's how he's going to deal with it now. You know why? Because he's not an animal, he's a person, and people have free will. So whatever he needs to do to take care of himself in that way, whether it's getting the encouragement, whether it's dealing with his biological urges, whatever it is, a good man doesn't want to force his wife because of the issue of seed spillage. That is, and I feel terrible for religious men who have this concern, but the answer of, you know, abusing your wife is not the solution. So, you know, so I think that's just kind of like an important piece to throw out there, and, you know, it has to be dealt with. And if they have, yeah.
So many people who could be listening is think like, oh my gosh, like, what do you his wife? He's not like abusing me. Like, again, there's that nuance of like, I'm agreeing to this. Like, I showed up to bed. I even wore lingerie. Like, women could be thinking that I'm doing that. Again, but when you're thinking like you have to, that's the issue. I want to say something about in regards to all of this, that it's like, it's so mind blowing to me, because it's like, if you took the pressure and force out of it, that is when
it gets good. That's when it gets good.
It'll get good. So it's like, oh my gosh, it's like negative.
Like a light bulb.
Yeah, months or years. And it's devastating that it's like that for such a long time. It's like, oh my gosh, just stop making it about something that you have to do. It's something you should want to do. If it's something you don't want to do, by the way, then also get answers for why don't you want to do. Like, you know, someone actually asked us this, right? Like, is it possible that I'm just not a sexual person? So rare. Like, possible, yes, but so not likely. It is much more likely that you're a sexual person, because most of us are born sexual. I mean, I always say this sometimes in my costumes, like, think about it. Like, you're born wet, naked, and hungry. And in order to survive, you're sucking on your mom's breast. Like, I'm not saying that in a perverted, you know, God forbid way, that the babies are obviously not sexual in that sense, but we're sexual beings by birth. Like, as a doula, this is what I see also, right? I didn't even mention that earlier, but this is the way we are. God did hardwire us, yes, to be sexual, and it gets shut down. Your sexuality can be shut down from the miseducation you had, from not even having the skill on how to make it more pleasurable. It can be. But if your answer now is like, but we have to for the meantime, and let's just do it anyways, because what's he going to do otherwise? And that fear of that is so negative and overpowering. That's actually what's pushing it to be not like even less positive or less pleasurable or less enjoyable for both people. Because for the husbands also, I just want women who are watching this to know, like, do you think for your husband, like, he's having so much fun, like when you're laying there and like you're completely not interested? Like, no, he's not. Maybe his like body's reacting and he's getting hard and he ends up ejaculating and he feels like, but some women tell me like, but I'm so jealous. He still had a good time. I'm like, he doesn't even know. He doesn't even know what a good time is if that's the only kind of sex that you guys even ever yet had, because this is not pleasure, like that you're like laying there and you're not interested and your head's someplace else and you're not connecting and you're dissociating or you're crying after and he's apologizing and then you wait 3 weeks and you do it all over again. That's such a negative cycle that can and should be broken because it's actually harmful, so harmful, and it's so hurtful. You know, like there is a much safer, healthier, more enjoyable way when you know that you have the right, both of you have the right to sit there and say, no, I'm actually really not in the mood tonight. Brides and grooms really have to know this. When you go to your wedding, you don't have to think we have to have sex on the wedding night. We have to consummate our marriage. What the law says about that is that it's ideal that you try. And by the way, I want to say as a college teacher, trying here actually means doing the best that you can to establish physical contact. If it's not emotionally, physically, or sexually traumatic. So obviously, because that's, again, never okay. If you need hours or days or weeks to just sit and talk on the couch and hold hands and become comfortable with your groom, that is okay. If you feel like you can go to first base, that's also okay. If you feel like you're okay with like being naked and that's as far as you can go, and now it's 4:00 in the morning and your body's feeling done and you're worried or nervous or scared, you don't have to say, well, I guess now we have to do the mitzvah. No, you don't. Like, that's, if you're not ready, then you're not ready, and you really should listen to your body. And this, the single people watching, and for the marrieds, again, who will relay this information to the singles that they love and know in their life, because that encounter of on the wedding night saying, well, no, we have to, and him pushing his way in and her crying and her having her legs tight and being so scared and so uncomfortable, and the pain building and the anticipation and the wish to tell him just stop, and her feeling like I can't just say stop, and him thinking I'm not allowed to stop because my teacher said I can't stop, and then finally it's over and it happens. That actually affects a lot of people. Yes, even 3 years later, the body remembered and now shuts down, feels like, I don't want to do that again. Sex is scary or not safe for me, or it's painful and uncomfortable and I don't have the right to say no. And those memories kind of pile on top of that. And that has a lot to do with libido, like a sex drive as well. Like your body is going to naturally produce less of a desire for that because you're like, I don't want those. Being like, oh, you know, if you had lasagna and it was delicious, and then one time you had really burnt lasagna, the last time you had burnt lasagna, obviously if you had delicious lasagna first, you have what to compare it to. What's if you didn't? What's if your first introduction to lasagna was that it was burnt and crispy and not like tomato saucy and cheesy and delicious? It was just like terrible, and all of a sudden you're like, do you want lasagna again? You're gonna be like, nah, I don't like lasagna, I'll take mac and cheese instead. I had that, I know that's good, right? So like, that's what happens in the bedroom. And so
I think you just made lasagna like an R-rated dinner for everybody who's on this live.
Oh, sorry.
No one here is ever going to eat lasagna the same way.
Like, because like most people really do love pasta. What's not to love? You know, and we can say the same for sex. Like, sex really is
supposed to taste good. It's supposed to
it's supposed to be amazing and enjoyable, like every way. When it's not, it's something that should be figured out. Like, it should be addressed. It shouldn't be kept that way. You know, it shouldn't be like that 5 years later you're still having non-pleasurable sex that you feel like you have to do, and it's a chore. Like, it's on my to-do list. Okay, like, had sex this week. Okay, check. Now I could finally like go do other things. It's
sex is one of those things that's very hard to be neutral. You know, it's when it's good, it's one of the greatest pleasures that there is. And that there's a multi-billion-dollar industry, not necessarily all good, but that would attest to that. The advertising industry totally, capitalizes on that. Like, sex is what people really want because it can be so great. And when it's bad, I don't think there's anything more traumatic than violating sex. And so there's this like amazing sexual experience that, people crave. Then there's this like awful traumatic experience. That's one of the worst things that a person could have. And then there's like all this stuff going on in the middle. And the main difference between all that is desire, is the meaning that you make of it when you're touching someone's body or they're touching yours, and the sense of autonomy and empowerment and possibility that's going on between you and your partner at that time. And so that's why it is so critical that the messaging for these young people, I always say, trying to teach about having sex before you become sexually active is like trying to teach people to swim when they're not in water, they're on dry land. You know, you don't necessarily know. You can fantasize and you can get to know your body and you can, you know, read stuff and hear stuff, but like till you're in it, you know, there's a learning curve. It takes time. And, you know, and by the way, just to piggyback on what Bracha was saying before, if a couple had, because so many couples do have that very traumatic, rocky, painful, awful, inaugurative sexual experience, don't think that that dooms you for good. It's treatable. It could change. You know, you just might need some help because you have to, like, you know, relearn what it feels like to feel good. And the secret sauce to that is consent, right? As long as you're feeling obligated and pressured and demanded and like I have no choice, you're not going to feel desire. You need to have space for desire if you're going to be able to enjoy.
Right. I actually want to say something also about that, to just add on that, because I know that there's going to be some, like, you know, either college teachers, and some rabbis will be like, oh, what do you mean? Are you like telling the masses now that they don't have to have sex on the wedding night? So first of all, yeah, I am. Like, sorry, but not sorry. Because again, if they have the right education about how to go about having sex for the first time, then in my opinion, it is so much more likely that they'll have it sooner rather than later, but in a much, much healthier way. Because there's two ways to go about that. Either it could be like you have to do it on that night and he pushes your way through and it's a negative, terrible experience for a lot. Again, I'm not saying, obviously there's some people that it ends up going smoothly and possibly like what you said earlier, option number one, but very few and far between situations end that way. I'm talking about the many who end up pushing their way through and trying to just get over the pain and get it over with already and kind of rip off the Band-Aid and just do it. And I'm, you know, addressing that, the people in that camp versus all the people who are like, okay, well, 1 second, if you're saying I don't need to do it that way, and the college listening to this, or again, you know, people who could tell them that, oh, I could tell my younger sister that she doesn't have to and that she should take it slow. Chances are, like, if she liked her fiance, her chassan, and they have a good communication, which they shouldn't agree to marry each other if they don't at least have that, and they slowly talk about and spend hours through the Sheva Brachas week, like touching each other and kissing and hugging and caressing each other and slowly letting that build, chances are that she'll feel so much more ready when she is ready, and had the space to say, I have the right to say yes or no, and so does he. And it's just so much smoother that way, even if it is uncomfortable still and awkward, like you said, or those things are still there. There isn't this like feeling of like, no, but we have to, you know, it's just so much more, it's just so much healthier, you know, and I see that being a much better option. And I have to say, most of the college that I've taught, I check with them after, and like so many of them tell me like that it went so smoothly and they were in little to no pain based on everything that I'm teaching them about, like how to prepare their body and get ready. It doesn't have to be this like traumatic, in the dark, under the sheets, him pushing his way through and you crying in the bathroom afterwards by yourself and you thinking, oh, that's the way sex, you know, is, or that was just like the most horrible thing. Let's go to like 6 more nights of parties now, the last that I want to do. You know, like it's just, someone asked over here, I have to scroll back to see it. Someone asked, what's your source for being allowed to not have sex with first night? The halacha.
Do you know, I think it's in Parsha Ki Tetzei that there is, it says that if a man rapes a woman, and then Rashi says, says that like a person raping, you know, a man raping a woman is akin to murder, right? So taking a person by force, even because the person feels like this is religiously obligated, it's like murder. So murder is pretty bad. It's like one of the big 10. So that would be a good source, right? You know, and, you know, and again, what Bracha wasn't saying was that
Go ahead. Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I don't think Bracha was saying like it doesn't matter if you do anything sexual on the wedding night. I don't think she's saying like, you know, after the wedding you could like make love or whatever, watch a movie. Like I don't think that was her point. I think her point is that when everyone understands that there's supposed to be something beautiful and consummating about after the wedding. But if you walk in there with that sense of obligationality, with that sense of pressure, with that sense of like I really have no choice in what's about to happen to my body, then it's going to feel like a violation. If you're properly educated, and educated, I don't mean just from college classes. I mean from when you're young until you're older about your body, about what feels good, about pleasure, then you're more likely, what?
That all the moms who are watching this, hopefully are paying attention to that, because that's why it matters so much. Like at the end of the day, do you know for sure what your daughter's you know, college teacher in 10, 15, or 20 years from now is going to teach them? I hope good. Like this is part of my passion, education, and making this not just, I can't be the only teacher teaching it this way, right? And again, I'm not, but there's a lot more that are teaching it the other way rather than this way, right? So like, it's so important for parents to like teach their kids, like you have consent, and on the wedding night, like it's a mitzvah to try to be as physical as you feel like you can be. But as soon as you feel like you can't, or it's too much, or you're tired, or you're done, or you're scared, that's your body telling you, please stop.
Slow it down. Yeah.
Listen to that. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and just to say also a little bit more on source wise, like the Gemara literally talks about like there's very few things actually that are like really considered an isser, like that.
Nine.
It's
not
9. There's 9 midos according to the Gemara that a husband and wife should not do in the bedroom, and one of them out of 9 things is, and it applies to both genders, even though it's said in the male to female gender, because that is what's more common. But again, it applies to both. Force is never, ever allowed. So if, again, on the wedding night, someone's coming in thinking that they have to, that's not them feeling like they're allowed to say no if they're taught that they can't, or that they even should, or that's even possible to say no. If you think, well, you have to do it. No, he does not have to do it that way. You know, you do have the right to say no. So, and that's always, again, that's in the marriage as well. Like it's not, you going to the mikvah and you're coming home being like, well, what do you mean? It's mikvah night.
Someone asked this source. I think in the Shulchan Aruch, it's Siman Reish Mem. It brings down the Gemara and Halacha L'Maisa. But I wanted to mention something else. We might get cut off, but if we do, we do. There's
oh yeah. Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
Yeah. Get a notice. 2 minutes. No, go ahead.
So there's a biopsychosocial model when it comes to a lot of things, relational stuff and mental health stuff. And biopsychosocial means like the biological, the intrapersonal, what's going on within your mind and your body and yourself, and then the social, the interpersonal. So when people present with sexual issues, sometimes it's specific to them and what they're dealing with, but sometimes it's going on within the relationship. And so sometimes people will say like they're like sort of pure sexual issues of just like, you know, we're best friends, we're so close, everything is going great, but then we get to the bedroom and things aren't going well. And then there are issues where like you'll deal with the relationship and you'll be like, these people don't really seem to be nice to each other. Let's see what's going on in the relationship at large. So sometimes you'll have someone where the sexual problem isn't really a sexual problem. It's really a sexual manifestation of a relationship problem. And so that also is something that I think is worth just tossing out there, is that if you're someone who sometimes has sexual pleasure and sometimes not, and you're noticing a correlation with like, you know, sometimes you'll just try to force yourself to be together even when you've had a big fight or you're upset about something and you're not dealing with it. Don't be surprised if your body doesn't want to cooperate because your heart is not in it. And like what Bracha mentioned before, like, you know, like hugging it out and holding hands and being there for each other in an affectionate way can be a really nice part of making up. But just jumping into bed and pretending to like disassociating from the fact that you might have some relational issues going on doesn't often end well. Sometimes it does. If it does, then that's lucky, but it's not considered the recommended way to deal with conflict. Right.
The 2 things to also add to that is that one of the 9 midos actually also are that, you know, during hatred, or like when you're hated. So if you're in a huge fight and you're like, let's put our fight on pause and I'm horny, so let's just have sex. So your husband or you is thinking like, this is a way to get over our fight. No, you first need to communicate, hash out your fight, even if it means fighting a little bit more till you settle and have a resolution or conclusion to the argument. And then you could go and have what they call make-up sex, because you're not supposed to do it when you're in anger or in a fight or uncomfortable with each other. So that adds to what you just said about like, if your relationship is in a place where it's negative and you're just pretending, in the bedroom, that all of your problems don't exist and you're just gonna like go ahead and have sex anyways because it's your mikvah night, even though you guys fought like cats and dogs that day. Like, that's not healthy. You definitely should go to therapy and heal from that. That's one. And the second thing is, you know, to loop in like another aspect of it is, you know, you'll have some women tell me like, you know, I'm not really in the mood. I'm not so interested. Is it okay? Is it okay if I just say yes for his sake? And the answer to that is, if you're okay
it depends.
with it, yes, it does depend. If you feel like, you know what, I'm really not in the mood, I'm so tired, but I'm totally down to have a quickie for you right now, cool, awesome, go for it. Have 2 minutes, 5 minutes of fun and let him have his release and his enjoyment. Great. First of all, that's not the way sex should always be, that it's quickies. That's number one. Number two is, that's, again, only okay if it's okay for you. If he's asking you because he's interested, he's dropping the hints, or he's being very explicit, like starting to take your clothes off, and you're exhausted and you're really not interested, it's important that you know that you can say, I love you. I'm so sorry that I'm really not up for it right now. I'm just not, you know? And that's that. And then the middle is like, you can tell him like, look, I'm really not up for it, but you could try to get me in the mood, or I'm okay, you know, if it's quick and short and sweet. But like, you know, so it's not like it's not okay to do sometimes for your partner. And again, this is okay for men to do for their wives also. Like, if your wife is horny and you're exhausted because you had a very stressful day at work or whatever it is, and you're just like not feeling it so much, but you see she's interested, so you're okay with like giving her some pleasure or something because you see she desires you right now, it's okay to do that if you're okay with it. If you're not okay with it, if you're going to sit there the whole time being like, I resent this, I'm so uncomfortable, I wish this was over, please make it stop, and those are the things that someone's thinking in their head, that's when it's not okay to do. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. So really tune in to your body and to your mental, like, thought process, like what's going on in your mind and in your body to see. And, you know, you're not always going to get this right. You know, there are times where you might want to push yourself for your partner because you feel like, yeah, I could probably get into it. And then afterwards you'll have this like yucky feeling of like, I feel a little taken advantage of. And that, by the way, doesn't mean that your partner took advantage of you. It might be that you kind of like encourage him to, you put yourself out there too much. You overextended.
That's where it's so important for like people to learn to listen to their body.
Yeah.
That's why conversation that like people should know, like in terms of consent and comfort, like you should be aware of what your body is telling you if you're interested or not, you know, because that's so important for always, for later, as you explore and develop sexually with each other and you know, get more and more comfortable with each other. That's something that's going to happen, and you need to know like, oh, you know, that time when I was that kind of tired and I pushed myself to do it, it was a little too much, you know. That kind of thing.
There's another answer, which I think we may have mentioned before, but I think it's worth mentioning again. It doesn't always have to be yes or no. So sometimes if, let's say, your partner approaches you because they're in the mood, and you're not sure if you're in the mood, so then you can sort of say like, you know what, I'll tell you the truth. I'm not really sure if I'm up for it, but I definitely would love to like cuddle and make out a little. Can we just play it by ear and see how it goes? And that way, you know, you're leaving the door open to the possibility of it, but you're being very upfront and honest and saying, you know, we might just be having like a, you know, PG-13 cuddle session rather than, you know, going all the way here. And, you know, and that's fine too. Or you might end up going all the way. And honestly, I really think Bracha said this before, and I can't even tell you, like, I've lost count of how many times this happens. The minute you take that pressure off the table and say, you know what, let's just hold each other, let's just cuddle a little bit. Sometimes the lower libido person is like, nah, let's go for it, you know, because, you know, you don't have to, you know.
Actually, yeah, there's, like we said, pressure is the number one killjoy.
Pressure kills. Yeah.
It totally kills. Okay. What else did we not like cover?
I feel like we had actually made a list of topics that we wanted to talk about. I think we hit on most of the important ones. I think that we should just mention again, because it feels like, I know that whenever I give a talk like this, we don't have a lot of interaction with the audience, but usually like the Q&A always goes back to like, oh my gosh, I want to do better for my children. I want to do better for the next generation, even people who don't have children yet, or, you know, want to do better for their children. You know, and that's really why, I think it's so important to educate everyone to educate themselves. On my website, I have a resources section. If you click on resources, there's like a lot of books. Like, this is one of my favorite books. I have it right here, Show and Tell. I don't know her, by the way. This is not like a plug for like somebody that her name is Dr. Yocheved Dibau, and she wrote this book called Talking About Intimacy and Sexuality. And she did a phenomenal job. She's an Orthodox woman. She uses Torah sources and clinical.
Teacher, really. I'm in a college teacher.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You can tell her I'm a fangirl. I really admire her work. I went to hear her speak in person once. I was like starstruck. She did a really phenomenal job, and you know, it's a very cost effective way to get a really great perspective on. And you know, what a lot of people who read these books or take my course, you know, are people who are not necessarily even in a sexual relationship. They might not be married and they might not have children, but they're just trying to like heal their own like inner child self that wasn't educated properly. And there could be something so healing about reading and listening to perspectives that's like, oh wow, if only someone had spoken to me this way, that would have been incredible. And now you're sort of like re-educating yourself. A few people asked what's the book. It's called Talking About Intimacy and Sexuality. I think there's a link to it on, like, if you go to my website elliechevalis.com and you click on resources. She's publishing a new one soon. That's so cool. Somebody wrote. Yeah, you can find it there. And also, you know, I think Bracha also, we both have a tremendous amount of free content available on our websites for, you know, written content and audio and video stuff. So just make yourselves, you know, knowledgeable so that, you know, you can enjoy your relationship more. And if you're educating other people, you know, children or students or, you know, or people who are getting married, you know, knowledge is power and it's empowerment, and it can do wonders. It can make the difference between having a traumatic sexual inauguration or one that is as beautiful and pleasurable and wonderful as it really can and should be.
Right. Absolutely. I you know, we had we could talk about this for hours. There's so many questions that came in. I just wanted to like kind of comment here for everyone who was coming on thinking like, we're going to talk about like vibrators and like more pleasure. Wasn't the goal of tonight. The goal of tonight was like for removing all of the negative things that were unfortunate, like just to highlight and create awareness, I guess, that there is so much negative information that doesn't mean it has to define your sex life for the rest of your life, and it really shouldn't. And for anyone young who's like even embarking on this, I'm so happy for them to hear it now as a preventative measure. For people who are listening to this, that's like after the fact that they already unfortunately have a negative experience, had a negative experience, they should know that they're not alone. Hundreds, thousands of couples, women, you know, and couples deal with this. And there really is information and help out there. Like Elisheva said, there's books, there's podcasts, there are, you know, blog articles. Me and you do like so much sexual education, like for free, like on our pages all the time. If I had more time, like I could do it all day long, but I can't. Like I also have to work and show up for my family and my clients and all of that. But this is so important as a starting conversation. It's not like anywhere near over. There's so many more questions that came in that could be addressed, but really we wanted to bring to everyone's attention that, you know, sex should be pleasurable. It's not supposed to be painful physically or emotionally, psychologically, or in any other capacity, that you are never, ever forced or obligated to have sex when you don't want to have sex, even if you're married. Yes, even if you're married. That's really important for people to know. And if they felt like that ever, and it's still impacting them, or if they feel like that's still now, they should know that there is help out there, that you can go to therapy. You go to therapy, sex therapy, like Elisheva or me. I'm a sex coach, or someone else, you know, anyone else who does this, who can hopefully help you. And if you're in treatment, right, if you're going to someone and you're trying to rehabilitate yourself and heal, and feel like still some of the things that are being told to you have that same negative messaging, then run away, you know, go to someone else. Because it's actually, again, it is a little scary if you go to someone who believes this themselves. Like if you're going back to your educator, your college teacher, your husband teacher, your rabbi, your, you know, sex therapist, whoever it is, or someone else who told you, and they're reiterating that doesn't you should know that that's not the way. And there's answers for this. So I think that just is so important. I wanted to leave on a positive note. Yes. I'm so happy. Instagram is being so generous. Like for some reason, we're just going, which is amazing.
We're just running with it.
Yeah. I really want people to know that like there's information and there's help, and it's skill and something you could learn, and not to feel, you know, guys could feel inadequate, or, you know, demasculated by like having to talk about this. Woman could feel like, what's wrong with me? Am I not attracted to him if he's not showing interest or whatever it is? Woman could feel like, what's wrong with me that I don't want it? Maybe I'm just not sexual, or I don't know how to be sexy. I have women literally tell me this, like, I don't know how to be sexy. Like I feel awkward, like getting in lingerie or like doing a dirty dance for my husband. I'm like, how are you supposed to know that?
It's new. It's new.
you could learn. But if like you don't want to all the time do something and you're making yourself do something that you don't want to do, that is a problem, and you definitely can and should get help for that, you know. So we're here, you know, we're sex professionals who deal with this, and there's other people as well who deal with this. So yeah, what did you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to add one of my pet peeves, that a lot of advice that a lot of people get that I really humbly disagree with, is fake it till you make it. Please, please don't fake it till you make it. You can fake it till you make it in other areas of life, but when it comes,
like a tiny bit, meaning like on the nights that you're like, I'm not really in the mood, but I could do this for you, that's okay.
So I don't call that faking it. Meaning if you're being honest, you know what I mean? Like I'm talking about people faking being very excited and being very turned on when they're really crying on the inside. That's the difference between being kind and being phony is very clear, right? If I say, like, if I see you in the street and I'm not feeling so happy, and I say, hey, how's it going? Because I really do want to be kind to you, that I'm not being fake. I'm trying to be polite. If I say, hey, Bracha, how's it going? You know, then I'm being fake, right? So if there's a total disconnect, then that's fake. And again, even if you're being fake for like the kindest reasons, you're betraying your own body and your own heart and your relationship. And even if your partner is getting like that biological release by being together, they're not getting the emotional intimacy that goes with consensual, loving, you know, honest sex.
You know, if one partner's hurting, then you're automatically both hurting. Like, I really wish women absorb that. Like, if you're in pain and you're not, or you're like emotionally in pain, right? You're not, or physically in pain, and you're not wanting, well, I'm just going to do this for my husband. I'm going to do him a favor. He's hurting also in the end, in the long run, when you're being with him, when you really don't want to, because that's coming at the price of everything you just said, that the sex is, it's not great. Yes, maybe there's a release, but so what? Like, it's not the intimacy and the desire that can build, and the love and the consensuality and the building of an amazing sexual relationship. That's not the way it's going to happen when one or both are feeling disinterested, but pushing their way through, you know, having this sexual relationship anyways. So, you know, I just also want to add one more thing. Like, even though we obviously touched on the halachic aspect, because we're Orthodox women, and I never ever like talk about sexuality that is in conflict with halacha. So I just wanted to say that. And so there's so many sources to back the things that we said. So unfortunately, for people think like, well, then how come, you know, so-and-so chassan teacher who's been teaching for 30 years could say this, or how come, you know, whatever. It's like, I don't know. Go challenge him. Like, I'm doing my part to challenge them. I like, meaning like, don't, just because they're saying it, it doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it okay. Because it's really not, you know. And there is, it's like we're saying it, giving people quote unquote permissions to do what they want. We're telling you what the Torah actually has to say. You want sources on that? Great. Go do your homework. Message us. Like, I mean, don't message me. Actually, probably will never see it. I'm so sorry. My inbox is so flooded. But like, if you're a client, we go over it. If I'm teaching a kala, obviously I'm teaching the sources. If I teach a course for marrieds, I'll include sources. Point is that like the sources are actually there. We're not just saying that. That being said, like, we're not paskening, like, we're not rabbis. You know, you can still double check with your halachic, you know, local halachic authority, and you should. But again, if they're saying something that is opposite this, if you go to a rabbi, you go to a chassan teacher, and you tell them, well, I heard, right, from me and Elisha or whatever, we heard that, you know, our son does not need to do this. Like, is it true? And he's like, yes, they do. He needs to push his way in anyways, or whatever it is for the wedding or thereafter. Ask for sources for that, you know, like, don't just take it at face value. Like, question it, because you can, and you should, politely, obviously, and respectfully. But you could say like, this doesn't line up with other things that made more sense to me that I did end up seeing inside, that's not the way to do it. So like, prove me otherwise. Like, don't take that information as though this is the way it is, you know, because it's not.
Right. I want to just like, also, like you said, try to end on a positive note and just say like, no matter how negative your messaging has been about, you know, your own body, your own sexual experience, your own marital relationship, like no matter what you've been through, this is an area that can really turn around when you get the right information, the right reading, the people to help you, the right people to talk to, and, you know, to have a good therapist or, you know, a professional on your side. If you need a halakhic authority to bounce things off of, that makes you feel better. And if you're doing it with a loving, respectful, empathetic partner, you know, this can turn around really well. Like the prognosis is actually really good. It's not one of those things. It's like, oh, well, you know, it's just going to be like this for me forever because it's been like this as long as I know. This is a really, really treatable issue. So really try. Yeah.
Something quick on that. I had once who came to me, and she learned in her, you know, Beis Yaakov education that, you know, sex is for the man and you got to be there for him whenever you want. And if you don't, for his zera levatala, and like all of the stuff that we just said, but like literally all of it was like what her sex education was. And she was coming to me because she never wanted to have sex with her husband, and it was at a point where like her marriage was like on the brink of like ending because she was never interested, but she was doing it still anyways because she thought she had to do it. So I just looked at her and I said, like, you know, you don't have to, like, you don't have to. And she burst out crying. Like, she's like, what do you mean? And I'm like, no, you really don't have to. And she was sobbing. She's like, but it's going to be my fault. I'm like, what? Like, if he masturbates or whatever it is. And I'm like, that's not why you're having sex. Like, you know, and she was just so mind blown because she didn't equate any of her issues with lack of desire or interest in having sex with the fact that she felt such an enormous amount of pressure to always say yes. She's never, in over 5 years of marriage, ever once told her husband no. Even when she was in pain, exhausted, postpartum.
And I'll tell you something else. A lot of those couples where she's never said no to her husband, the husband will complain and say, in all of the years, my wife has never initiated being together, right? She's never initiated sex. It's like, well, there's no space for her to create desire because she can never say no. So why would she initiate it when she knows that at any point she has to be available? So the minute she knows she has the opportunity to say no, if it's a good relationship, if she loves him and if they've been nurturing their relationship in general, and then it's like, oh, well, if I could say no tonight, then maybe I'm in the mood tomorrow. And then I'm honoring my own feelings, you know?
Exactly. That's why I brought that up, because you were saying in terms of the positivity ending on a high note and how much of a good chance there is. I just want to say this couple's like doing so well. Like, they don't need me anymore. They're great. But like, we ended on such a good note. Like, they had like suddenly, like, she found her desire after 5 years of marriage and being like, oh my gosh, I actually want to have sex. Like, when you tell me I don't have to have sex, I might want to have sex. You learn about pleasure and how to make it more enjoyable and what foreplay means to her and how he can pleasure her and make her happy. Suddenly was like, oh yeah, do that to me more. Like, that's something that she never got to experience for like the longest time because she didn't even know like that was an option. It was like, it's for the man. It's just for him. So ladies, sex is also for you. Like, it's for both of you. It's for both of you to enjoy. Both of you should have pleasure, and both of you at any point are allowed to say no. And if you're finding yourself in a situation where you repeatedly want to say no, go find out why. Go get help. Reach out to somebody. Go to a professional. There is care and help out there. Your sex life can, please God, turn around and be amazing. Like the stuff of the dreams, it can happen for you. I've seen that happen with my own eyes, and it's honestly like the most beautiful thing to watch a couple go from like being down in the dumps and thinking that they're going to get divorced because they're so sexually incompatible, and he always wants it and she never does, and she always says yes anyways, and he's like, whatever. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, what do you mean? Like, she's surprising him and she's coming home from mikvah and like, you know, initiating and saying, sure, let's do it. Like, all of that is just, it's just amazing to see. So it's possible. It takes time. You know, people should understand that it takes time to heal and find yourself and grow. But it's definitely doable. And I think that's amazing. Okay. You know? Yeah. Any
I feel like we covered all. I mean, there's so much more to say, but I feel like this is a good wrap up place. You know, we've been on for a while. I see a lot of people asking their halachic questions, and they're legitimate questions, and there's what to say on them. But I don't think this is the time for those questions. But there are, like, again, if you look, and there are more and more books that are coming out that bring down like the actual primary sources of, you know, the Gemaras and the Shulchan Aruch and the Shailas and Shuvas that come, and, you know, do your own research. And obviously, like if you're someone who leads your life by going by a particular posek, you can discuss it with, you know, your rabbi or rebbitzin to find out, you know, which version of the sources you follow. But be sure to tell them the whole story, because, you know, there are a lot of things that initially they might say, oh, that's not recommended. But if you say, oh, but that's the only way that I can really get aroused, then that changes the question. You know, so be sure that you're finding out the information in a reputable way. A lot of the things that are sort of not so recommended in the Gemara, a lot of the rabbis will be like, oh, but no, in a particular couple's individual experience, you know, the pleasure is something that we're, you know, focused on. So, yeah.
Right. Important thing in the Torah is for the couple to have pleasure. So if that's not happening, then there is so much like
flexibility.
Yeah, even within the law, that there's more flexibility within the law to make it happen, because the main priority and the most important thing is that a couple has pleasure. So I just wanted to say thank you, everyone, so much for joining tonight. Elisheva, thank you for taking on this really difficult topic with me. When I was posting about it, it was like so obviously heavy because it's so serious and so important. I was holding so much space for so many people's pain that it feels, obviously, and I addressed it in like the best capacity I can. And I had an article, you know, someone wrote an article about me on the forward that it led to that whole conversation from it. Like there was so much that was born from that, but I always felt like, you know, this has to be even more comprehensive, more accessible for people later to watch and listen and absorb, so that they know full rounded, like, yes, it's hard. It could have been traumatic, but that doesn't mean that for life, that you're doomed, that your sex life is going to be terrible for the rest of your marriage or days. You should really know like that there is what to do. And there's hope. I have so much hope now for like the next generation, because so many of the people watching this are like the moms, right? Who are, God willing, please God, going to raise their sons and daughters differently, to know like consent is so important, and it's such a big piece of the pleasure, and it's a big part of the component. So it's Torah, like it's literally God. This is the guidelines. This is like what Hashem does want from us.
God wants you to enjoy.
Yeah, pleasure is like sex. Pleasure is like one of the biggest gifts He gave us. So we're so grateful. Thank you, God. And I want everyone to have that pleasure and gift in their life and have that fulfillment and enjoyment. So thank you so much for doing this with me. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And, you know, I'm sure we'll have more articles and questions and answers that we could both answer in the coming days. But this was really good. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Even so, everyone pray that it works.
A few people asked for the email address to get the document. It's speaktosomeone@gmail.com. Speak to someone, all words, no numbers. If you forget, we can share it again, but happy to send it if anybody wants.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, everyone.
Have a great week.
You too. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.